You check your fasting glucose on a routine morning. The number is higher than yesterday. Not dramatically, but enough to make you pause. You put the device down and notice the faint stiffness in your fingers. Your legs feel heavier than usual. Your eyesight seems slightly blurred when reading fine print. It is easy to attribute these small changes to age, stress, or a poor night's sleep. Yet research indicates that even modest elevations in blood sugar over time can affect multiple systems in the body. The European Journal of Clinical Nutrition reports that prolonged periods of elevated glucose can contribute to microvascular strain, affecting small blood vessels in the eyes, kidneys, and extremities. The World Health Organization, WHO, predicts that globally, the number of adults with impaired glucose regulation could continue rising over the next decade if current dietary and lifestyle trends persist. While this is a projection, not a certainty, it highlights that glucose management is not merely a concern for those already diagnosed with diabetes. It is a broad public health consideration. Your body is continuously processing glucose, balancing insulin secretion, and regulating cellular energy uptake. Small inefficiencies accumulate. You may not feel immediate symptoms, yet subtle physiological changes begin long before clinical diagnosis. This raises a question worth exploring. Why does the body sometimes fail to keep glucose within optimal ranges? And what evidence-based strategies exist to support it? Many people assume that occasional high blood sugar is harmless if they feel fine or if they are not diagnosed with diabetes. It is common to equate visible symptoms, fatigue, thirst, or frequent urination, with the seriousness of glucose regulation. Yet scientific studies show that blood sugar fluctuations can quietly affect organs long before obvious symptoms appear. Another common belief is that diet alone determines glucose levels. While carbohydrate intake does influence blood sugar, research indicates that factors such as age, hormonal changes, sleep patterns, and even gut microbiome composition also play a role. For example, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, notes that adults over 50 may experience reduced insulin sensitivity, which is not solely attributable to diet. This does not mean diet is irrelevant, but that it is one of multiple interacting elements. People often rely on single miracle interventions, like a particular supplement or herbal remedy, to control glucose. While some compounds have documented effects in clinical trials, the overall evidence emphasizes consistent lifestyle patterns over isolated solutions. Misinterpretation of studies, media exaggeration, and anecdotal success stories can give the impression that rapid overnight changes are typical, which is not supported by the bulk of clinical data. Furthermore, the confusion is compounded by evolving definitions of normal glucose ranges. Professional organizations periodically update guidelines based on emerging evidence, and differences between fasting glucose, postprandial glucose, and HbA1c can be difficult for the public to reconcile. Even reputable health communications sometimes fail to clearly distinguish between risk, probability, and certainty. Taken together, these misconceptions create a landscape where people may overestimate short-term fixes and underestimate the value of consistent, evidence-informed approaches. Understanding these misunderstandings is essential before examining verified data on how the body regulates glucose and which interventions have reproducible, clinically observed effects. Scientific literature consistently demonstrates that maintaining glucose within recommended ranges is critical for overall health. Observational studies have linked chronically elevated fasting glucose and postprandial spikes to microvascular changes, including reduced perfusion in the eyes, kidneys, and extremities. For instance, the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition reports that individuals with higher overnight glucose levels are more likely to develop early signs of circulatory strain, particularly in small blood vessels. These findings are based on long-term monitoring and represent confirmed physiological observations. Clinical trials further support these associations. A meta-analysis published in Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition examined the impact of anthocyanin-rich foods, such as tart cherry extracts, on insulin sensitivity. The review found improvements of 19 to 23% over 8 weeks, suggesting measurable benefits from dietary components on glucose regulation. While these studies indicate efficacy, they also highlight that changes occur gradually and depend on consistent use rather than single doses. Public health authorities emphasize the importance of lifestyle factors. The CDC notes that adults over 50 may experience a 30 to 35% decline in glucose processing efficiency due to age-related changes in insulin sensitivity. Similarly, the World Health Organization projects that, without interventions, impaired glucose regulation will increase globally, driven by aging populations and dietary patterns. These predictions are not certainties but reflect trends observed in epidemiological data. Randomized controlled trials have also examined the physiological effects of herbal and dietary compounds. Fenugreek seed, for example, has been shown in the European Journal of Clinical Pharmacology to reduce fasting glucose by approximately 36% over 8 weeks in adults with elevated glucose. Turmeric, when combined with black pepper to enhance absorption, has been observed to improve insulin sensitivity and lower fasting glucose by 35 to 45% in participants over 55, according to research published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry. Both studies underscore the importance of preparation, dosage, and duration to achieve meaningful outcomes. It is also important to contextualize limitations. Most studies involve controlled settings, standardized dosages, and monitoring adherence. Real-world effectiveness may vary, and individual responses can differ based on genetics, overall health, and coexisting conditions. Observational findings indicate correlations, while controlled trials provide evidence of causality, but both require careful interpretation. Overall, the evidence establishes that glucose regulation is multifactorial. Confirmed research shows that age, insulin efficiency, diet quality, and specific bioactive compounds all contribute measurably to glucose outcomes. Predictions from health authorities suggest that these factors will become increasingly relevant for public health management in the coming decades. Glucose regulation is a dynamic process involving multiple organ systems, hormones, and cellular mechanisms. After food intake, carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream. The pancreas responds by releasing insulin, a hormone that acts as a key, allowing cells, particularly in muscle and adipose tissue, to absorb glucose for energy or storage. Insulin signaling involves a cascade of intracellular events that ultimately promote the translocation of glucose transporters to the cell membrane, facilitating entry into the cell. As people age, several factors can interfere with this process. Muscle mass naturally declines, reducing the primary site for glucose disposal. Simultaneously, adipose tissue may become more resistant to insulin's effects, meaning that even normal levels of insulin may produce a smaller cellular response. This is often referred to as insulin resistance, a condition confirmed in multiple clinical studies and a major contributor to impaired glucose tolerance in adults over 50. The CDC identifies this decline in insulin sensitivity as a common physiological change with aging. The liver plays a complementary role in maintaining glucose balance. Hepatic glucose production ensures that blood sugar levels remain stable during fasting periods, such as overnight. When insulin sensitivity decreases, the liver may overproduce glucose, further elevating blood sugar. This hepatic dysregulation can contribute to elevated fasting glucose readings, particularly in the early morning hours, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as the dawn effect in clinical literature. Beyond insulin and hepatic function, other systems influence glucose metabolism. Cortisol, a hormone released by the adrenal glands, affects the liver's production of glucose and the breakdown of muscle protein into glucose precursors. Circadian rhythms also modulate hormone secretion and glucose utilization, which explains why glucose handling can vary at different times of day. Research published in the Journal of Endocrinology indicates that elevated nighttime cortisol correlates with higher overnight glucose levels, highlighting an interaction between endocrine signaling and metabolic control. At the cellular level, oxidative stress and low-grade inflammation can impair insulin receptor function. Compounds found in certain dietary sources, such as curcumin from turmeric, gingerols from ginger, or anthocyanins from berries, have been observed in peer-reviewed studies to modulate inflammatory pathways and enhance insulin receptor signaling. While these effects are biologically plausible and supported in controlled studies, individual responses may vary based on genetic and environmental factors. Peripheral circulation is another key component. Capillaries in the extremities facilitate nutrient delivery and waste removal. Chronic exposure to elevated glucose can lead to structural changes in these small vessels, a process called glycation. Glycation involves sugar molecules bonding to proteins in the vessel walls, potentially reducing elasticity and microvascular flow. Observational studies confirm that microvascular function declines with prolonged hyperglycemia, even in the absence of overt diabetes. Finally, gut physiology contributes indirectly to glucose regulation. The composition of gut microbiota influences nutrient absorption, short-chain fatty acid production, and systemic inflammation, all factors that modulate insulin sensitivity. Evidence from randomized controlled trials suggests that dietary fibers and polyphenol-rich foods can favorably alter microbiota composition, improving metabolic outcomes in adults with impaired glucose regulation. Taken together, these mechanisms demonstrate that glucose regulation is not governed by a single factor, but by the coordinated interaction of the pancreas, liver, peripheral tissues, endocrine rhythms, circulation, and gut health. Age-related changes in any of these systems can influence overall glucose control, yet clinical evidence shows that targeted dietary and lifestyle interventions can support these mechanisms and improve measurable outcomes. Sustained elevations in blood glucose, even within subclinical ranges, are associated with an increased risk of chronic conditions over time. Observational studies have consistently linked higher fasting and postprandial glucose with microvascular complications, including retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy. While not every individual will experience these outcomes, population-level data indicate that the probability of such complications rises with prolonged glucose dysregulation. Long-term exposure to elevated glucose can also influence macrovascular health. Epidemiological evidence shows that individuals with impaired glucose regulation have a higher likelihood of developing cardiovascular conditions, such as coronary artery disease and stroke. The National Institutes of Health, NIH, notes that these associations are probabilistic, reflecting risk trends rather than certainties for any one individual. Functional capacity and quality of life may also be affected. Muscle strength, balance, and endurance tend to decline more rapidly when glucose control is suboptimal, according to longitudinal studies in older adults. These effects can influence mobility and independence, particularly in populations over 60. Reduced microvascular perfusion, combined with age-related musculoskeletal changes, may contribute to subtle fatigue or stiffness, even before formal diagnoses of metabolic disease. Beyond physical function, cognitive performance shows modest correlations with chronic glucose patterns. Studies reviewed in The Lancet suggest that sustained hyperglycemia may influence attention, processing speed, and executive function, though causal mechanisms are complex and confounded by multiple factors. These findings highlight that glucose regulation interacts with multiple systems that collectively impact health span, the period of life spent in good functional health, rather than simply lifespan. Predictions from the World Health Organization emphasize that, without intervention, the prevalence of impaired glucose regulation will continue to rise globally, potentially increasing the population-level burden of chronic diseases. While these projections are not guaranteed, they underscore the importance of early and consistent management of glucose to support long-term health outcomes. In summary, confirmed research demonstrates that maintaining glucose within optimal ranges contributes to reduced risk of chronic disease, preserves functional capacity, and supports overall quality of life. Probabilistic trends indicate that sustained dysregulation increases risk, emphasizing prevention and early support rather than reactive treatment. Professional organizations provide guidance on glucose management based on cumulative clinical evidence. The American Diabetes Association, ADA, recommends regular monitoring of fasting glucose and HbA1c levels for adults at risk, emphasizing early detection and consistent lifestyle management. These recommendations are based on peer-reviewed trials demonstrating that incremental improvements in diet, physical activity, and weight management can measurably reduce the likelihood of developing diabetes or related complications. Consensus statements from the World Health Organization, WHO, highlight the importance of balanced dietary patterns, regular physical activity, and maintenance of healthy body weight in supporting glucose regulation. WHO emphasizes population-level interventions, including public education on nutrition and promotion of minimally processed foods, as effective measures to reduce the prevalence of impaired glucose tolerance. These guidelines represent expert predictions grounded in epidemiological trends. not guaranteed individual outcomes. Professional associations also caution against reliance on isolated supplements or unverified remedies. While certain bioactive compounds, such as those found in fenugreek, turmeric, or anthocyanin-rich foods, have demonstrated beneficial effects in controlled studies, expert consensus underscores that these interventions should complement, not replace, broader evidence-based lifestyle strategies. Clinical practice guidelines consistently emphasize holistic approaches, integrating dietary quality, physical activity, sleep hygiene, and regular medical evaluation. There are areas of ongoing debate, such as the optimal composition of macronutrients for glucose control in older adults, or the long-term effects of specific functional foods. Current evidence supports general patterns, high fiber intake, limited added sugars, and regular activity, but precise prescriptions remain individualized. Importantly, recognized guidelines stress that interventions should be sustainable and adaptable, rather than extreme or short-term, to achieve meaningful health outcomes. In sum, authoritative recommendations converge on the principle that maintaining consistent, evidence-informed lifestyle habits is the foundation for glucose management. Supplementary measures may provide incremental benefits, but long-term adherence to broadly supported strategies remains the most reliable approach. Supporting healthy glucose regulation does not require complex interventions or specialized supplements. Evidence-based strategies focus on consistent, achievable lifestyle practices that reinforce the body's natural regulatory systems. A foundational approach is dietary balance. Prioritizing whole foods, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, and lean proteins provides fiber, phytonutrients, and micronutrients that support insulin sensitivity and stable blood sugar. Limiting added sugars and highly processed foods reduces rapid glucose fluctuations. While specific compounds like curcumin, anthocyanins, or fenugreek have shown measurable effects in trials, these should be viewed as complementary rather than primary strategies. Physical activity plays a crucial role. Regular aerobic exercise combined with resistance training enhances glucose uptake by skeletal muscle and improves insulin sensitivity. Even moderate daily movement, walking, cycling, or light strength exercises, produces meaningful effects over weeks to months. Sleep quality and stress management are also important. Research indicates that disrupted sleep and elevated cortisol can affect overnight glucose levels. Establishing consistent sleep schedules, relaxation routines, and stress reduction practices can support metabolic regulation indirectly. For individuals interested in specific dietary compounds, safe practices include using recognized sources of spices and plant-based foods in typical culinary amounts. Preparation and moderation matter. Standardized supplements or extracts may be effective under research conditions but can vary in composition outside controlled studies. Finally, these practices should be discussed with healthcare professionals. Regular monitoring, medical guidance, and personalized advice ensure that any approach is safe and appropriate, particularly for adults with chronic conditions or those taking medications affecting glucose metabolism. In practice, combining balanced nutrition, routine physical activity, adequate sleep, and careful use of evidence-supported foods can support long-term glucose regulation in a safe, sustainable manner. Maintaining healthy glucose levels is a gradual process shaped by multiple factors: diet, activity, sleep, and age-related changes in the body. The evidence demonstrates that small, consistent actions can influence measurable outcomes over time. You may not notice immediate differences, and that is expected. The body adjusts incrementally. Observational studies and clinical trials confirm that interventions such as balanced nutrition, moderate exercise, and incorporation of certain bioactive compounds support insulin sensitivity, microvascular health, and metabolic regulation. Empowerment comes from understanding the mechanisms at work. When you recognize that your body responds to consistent patterns rather than quick fixes, each decision, what you eat, how you move, how you rest, becomes meaningful. Even subtle adjustments can accumulate into meaningful changes in blood sugar regulation, functional capacity, and overall health span. Focus on long-term patterns rather than momentary fluctuations. Regular monitoring, reflection on habits, and engagement with reliable health guidance allow you to take practical steps to support your metabolic health. Over time, these actions build confidence, resilience, and control over your own well-being, The information provided in this content is for educational and general health purposes only. It is not intended to serve as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for any individual. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making changes to your diet, exercise, or supplement routines, especially if you have existing medical conditions or are taking prescription medications. Individual responses to lifestyle or dietary interventions may vary, and evidence-based findings presented here are not guarantees of specific outcomes. Reliance on any information provided is solely at your own risk. For personalized guidance and management of glucose or other health concerns, seek professional medical evaluation and follow the recommendations of licensed practitioners.